Who would have thought a year ago that Delaware would become the center of the political universe? Today, not only Joe Biden, but many other Delawareans, including our guest speaker, Senator Chris Coons, are poised to lead the nation and expand Delaware's voice in Washington and beyond. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Mike Reith, publisher of Delaware Business Times. On behalf of our team and the Small Business Development Center, we're glad that you're able to join us for this, our final program of 2020. Today's conversation will be a timely discussion on Washington's impact on Delaware small business. And perhaps we'll hear a little about Delaware's influence on Washington and how that may help create a more collaborative effort to support small businesses here and across the country. I'd like to thank our sponsors of the 2020 SBDC series, including Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, and Harvey Hanna and Associates. Their support is greatly appreciated and makes this presentation possible. Thank you again for attending this afternoon. I'd like to turn things over to Kevin Warsh from BNY Mellon Wealth Management in Greenville, Delaware. Kevin?
Thank you, Michael. I greatly appreciate the introduction. At BNY Mellon Wealth Management, we are very grateful of the opportunity to sponsor what promises to be a really terrific seminar and discussion. We're proud of our sponsorship and our association with the Delaware Business Times and the Small Business Development Center at the University of Delaware. Like them, we're dedicated to the business community in our small state of Delaware. And with that, I would like to introduce Margot Rain, who will be our moderator for today's discussion with Senator Coons. And thank you. And Margot, please go ahead. Margot, you're muted.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to echo Mike and Kevin's welcome and to thank our sponsors, BNY Mellon, Harvey Hanna, and our newest sponsor, Artisans Bank. This program is the final one for 2020. We look forward to beginning our 7th year of collaboration with the Delaware Business Times and the Delaware Small Business Development Center, presenting timely and informative programs for family-owned and closely held businesses. We will announce our 2021 lineup in January, and hopefully by spring, we will be able to see you in person. Today's speaker needs little introduction. Chris Coons has been our junior senator to the U.S. Senate since 2010, where Chris sits on the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Chris has an intimate knowledge of small businesses and has been a friend to the Delaware SBDC program for many years. This makes Chris exceptionally well qualified to enlighten us on what the future may hold for small businesses in Delaware. Chris will be talking for a few 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will begin answering questions that we have already received. If you wish to add a question, you may do so through that feature, and I will present those to Chris. Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Margot, and thank you to Mike and to Kevin for supporting this event and to SBDC Delaware. I want to give a particular shout out to Mike Bowman, who does a great job of helping small business, and to everybody on this call who's involved, whether as a small business owner, as a lender, as a community leader. I'm also going to specifically recognize James Spadola, who was just elected to Wilmington City Council. Great to have you on this call, James. This has been a very difficult and challenging time, as we all know. And one of the things that has made it less bad is the ways in which 7 months ago we came together in the Senate unanimously to pass the CARES Act, which delivered a significant amount of relief, something like $2 billion for Delaware businesses through the PPP program and through the EIDL program. This has been a period when the vast majority of our time and energy and our work together has been focused on COVID relief, both figuring out how to accommodate the dramatic loss in employment and in customers and in opportunity that came from the period when Delaware's economy was closed, when we were shut down, as it were, in order to bring down the number of cases. And then as we moved through, figuring out how to reopen safely, get access to the resources and support that would sustain small businesses. I do think that SBA and the SBDC have done a good job trying to communicate as frequently and openly as possible what were often dizzying changes in terms of rules and regulations from the SBA and from Treasury. My staff, I think, did a great job of engaging in outreach and constituent service, and I've tried my best to be accessible and responsive to each of you. Unfortunately, the bipartisanship that was the hallmark of the early period of this year when we passed the $2.3 trillion CARES Act and 3 other pieces of landmark legislation has not extended until late in the summer and the early fall when the House passed a very large bill, the $3.5 trillion HEROES Act, that would have provided a dramatic amount of support for state and local governments and another round of support for small businesses and extended support for those on unemployment. And the Senate ultimately has done nothing. There's been real disagreement between the Republican majority in the Senate and the Democrats, and we have failed to ever come to agreement on a package. As you know, the election on November 3rd has just now been ultimately called when Georgia and North Carolina were announced earlier today. And we're in a transition period to President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. And it's my hope that during this period, we will ultimately see the COVID relief package that should have happened months ago. There's a number of proposals. I'm happy to take questions on them. The area of the bill that has been the closest to bipartisan in agreement is that relating to a second round of the PPP, or Paycheck Protection Program. We've had a bill now for months that was drafted and written in part by me, by Senators Cardin and Shaheen, Senator Rubio, and Senator Collins. And it's my expectation that we will at least debate it. I don't know if we'll be able to pass something between now and the end of the year. A critical and unknown perspective is whether the president would sign it. President Trump, as you know, in the last 6 weeks, has gone back and forth between saying he wouldn't sign anything and he wanted to go bigger than the negotiations. The Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, and Speaker Pelosi negotiated right up until the week before the election, and were ultimately around a $1.8 to $2.2 trillion bill. The frustrating thing to me in particular was that $130 billion, which had been appropriated for the Paycheck Protection Program and simply needed us to authorize a second round. Ultimately, that program's expired. The money remains appropriated, but we need to come together to authorize a second round. We're now in a place where one of our top priorities is fixing and simplifying PPP forgiveness, ensuring that that forgiveness isn't taxed, that as the loans transition to grants, that grant does not bring with it new tax liability, and to eliminate the deduction of the EIDL advance from any forgiveness, to ensure that smaller borrowers only have to certify that they used it appropriately and not do a more thorough review by lenders, and to allow those in the mid-range, 50,000 to 150,000 in terms of the size of the loans, to be able to do it in 1 page or less. There's bipartisan agreement around this approach. I also think we ought to be extending the deadline by which the state and county can use the funds that they received under the CARES Act. The state of Delaware and Newcastle County have both announced and begun to implement programs to help those who have challenges in terms of mortgages and rent, in terms of small businesses, but they've got the resources to do a lot more if they had certainty about how much time they have to obligate and spend the funds. I've spoken to the governor and county executive about this repeatedly. So let me conclude there and move to taking your questions because I've got a wide range of content here that I'm not sure is completely relevant to the circumstances I suspect we're in. I've got Andrew Dinsmore with me here in Delaware. I don't know who else might be on this call from my office, but I simply wanted to thank the folks from SBA and SBDC and express again my appreciation for how hard you've worked and how hard Delaware's lenders have worked to reach out to those who have 7A or 504 loans to make sure they're aware of the debt forgiveness and the relief program that was a part of the CARES Act, and to welcome all of you to contact my office and me in terms of any assistance that we can provide going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So we've gotten a few questions. Can you guys hear? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Margot.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Some of the challenges. So, Chris, we got quite a few questions here. The first one is, what can be done to reduce the impact of federal regulations on small businesses and especially on small banks?
Well, thank you for the question, Margot. As you know, the Dodd-Frank bill was not amended for many years. And when it ultimately was, I was part of a bipartisan group that included Senator Carper that worked to change some of the restrictions and regulations of Dodd-Frank. Frankly, a big reason why this recession has not been worse is because the financial services sector, the banking sector in particular, community banks and regional banks, was healthier, was not as directly impacted as they were in the 08-09 financial services crash. But I know that FASB has a number of financial institutions anxious about what's our path forward. And I intend to keep listening to your input and working on ways that we can cooperate and collaborate to reduce regulatory impact.
Thank you. Our next question, what would be the top 3 most immediate impacts to Delaware small businesses under the Biden administration?
Well, you know, first I think, and we've got some feedback on the line right now. First, the most important thing that a Biden administration, a Biden-Harris administration will do that will help business is to actually listen to scientists and listen to public health. We have a COVID pandemic that is raging out of control. We have more than 1 million new cases just in the last 10 days. We've had the all-time high number of cases and hospitalizations all across the country in recent days. And as we go into winter, this is something that was predicted by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield literally back in February and March, was that there would be a big surge in the fall and that the coincidence of the flu season and a robust return of COVID would make the holidays particularly harsh. So when Joe Biden becomes president on January 20th, we'll see what kind of condition our country and our economy is in. But, you know, any of you who have influence or opportunities to communicate with Republicans, my hope is that the President Trump will take some responsibility for leading our country through this pandemic. Second, I actually expect President-elect Biden, once he is president, to communicate regularly with Congress, to convene us, to bring us in and to work with us on trying to enact a package. President Trump was literally absent from these negotiations. Mark Meadows and Secretary Mnuchin have mostly driven the negotiations, and over the summer they were competing. They were at loggerheads. They would go into negotiating sessions and say opposite things. It's only when Secretary Mnuchin was ultimately given the go-ahead to negotiate that we began to make some progress. So my hope is we'll have an administration that takes the pandemic seriously, negotiates a bipartisan package, and that we see an administration that empowers SBA and Commerce to use their tools in a way that actually responds to the needs of American business.
Okay, so my next question that came up is somebody wants to know if relief checks are going to be sent to citizens again.
I have no idea. You know, the reality is they are a part of proposals in both the House and Senate, but we've got to pass a package and we've got to pay for it. And as of now, a majority in the Republican caucus in the Senate does not want to send another round of stimulus checks. President Trump does support that. Some Republicans, and I think every Democrat does support that in the House and the Senate. So whether or not another round of stimulus checks gets done at this point will almost exclusively depend on whether President Trump agrees that he would sign a deal that includes a provision like that. It is in the House bill. It's been in some versions of the Senate bill, and the president has embraced it, but we haven't been able to get those three parts moving together.
Okay. Next question comes from Mr. Langer of Casey's Delights, and he says, "Thank you so much for doing your utmost to support us. My bank is having the greatest difficulties explaining to me what I should do to confirm my PPP into a grant. As I listen to you, would you confirm the best thing to do is just wait for now?"
I actually would not suggest just waiting. I would continue to engage with your bank and reach out to us. Folks in my office and I will work with you to try and make sure that you're getting the right answer, because this is not meant disrespectfully. Not every bank is equally as responsive and conversant with the program. In general, Delaware lenders have done a terrific job, and I'm really grateful for how hard Delaware lenders have worked. And I forget what your exact bank is. I know we've discussed this before, but I do hope that you'll be in touch with your bank and with us, and make sure you keep pressing the issue, so that you do get a loan to grant conversion as soon as is possible.
Thank you. One of our other questions would be, what are your plans for future technology legislation around internet access? With what we have seen and learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, do you ever see stable internet access becoming a right for every American in the future?
I don't see it becoming a right, sort of enacted in the Constitution. But I do see it being now widely understood that rural broadband, that equitable access, that closing the digital divide is an urgent need, not just a nice talking point or something we should get around to. Stable, high quality broadband is as important a piece of infrastructure as clean water and a functioning sewer system and modern highways. Now, we have failed to fully invest in modernizing our infrastructure. We haven't done an infrastructure program in the last 4 years, but there is enthusiasm. The Federal Communications Commission, where I'm the senior Democrat appropriating and regulating the FCC through my appropriations subcommittee, did push out grants, significant grants, to improve telehealth, and Delaware got several of them. They are pushing out grants for distance learning. And if there was ever a moment that would help focus Congress and the administration on the significance of making investments in expanding broadband access, it was this moment when we had so many with kids at home, working from home, trying to continue to conduct business from home and trying to learn from home. I don't know about you, but the Wi-Fi in my house crashed several times in the first few weeks when we had 3 college kids and 2 adults all in the same home trying to make it work. Delaware as a state has proactively invested in building cell towers and in promoting access out into Western Kent and Sussex counties. But we need, I think, to provide a more welcoming regulatory environment, more robust investment. And I have been talking with colleagues about ways in which we could legislatively dedicate the funds generated by the auction of the mid-band for 5G and dedicate that to rural broadband and to closing the digital divide.
Thank you. Thank you. This question is from Greg Buckley. Senator Coons, what will be the level of attention given to small businesses under President Biden's administration? Knowing both of your roots, the attention always seemed to be on big labor, big education, big pharma in a top-down Delaware way philosophy on economic growth. Since you will be a key cog in the new administration, and I'm sure a steady confidant, what is your plan for small business support?
Well, most of the job creation in our country comes from small business. One of the early significant signals will be who's chosen to lead the SBA, who's chosen to lead commerce, whether or not they're people with experience in the private sector and in supporting and promoting entrepreneurship and small business. And then there will be some early regulatory and appropriations decisions to be made. I think that of the entire CARES package, there was a significant bipartisan focus on investing in a robust way in rolling out record programs in terms of size and speed. We're now going to go through a period of some difficult accountability because the speed with which we distributed these funds did lead to some significant incidents of fraud. And there's going to be some accountability around that. My hope is that we do not overly focus on the small percentage relative to the enormous volume of loans that got out the door of those that were fraudulent. And we instead focus on the significant unmet needs for access to capital, access to programmatic support, because bluntly, I think all of us who voted for the CARES Act and who then pushed the SBA and more importantly, lenders to get a huge amount of dollars out the door, we recognized that we were prioritizing speed over precision. And most federal programs move very slowly because there is going to be accountability and oversight for how public dollars are spent. In some cases, that speed then leads to mistakes. I mean, there is a certain percentage error rate. We all knew that. If there's now an obsessive focus on the accountability for the errors that I think we will discover have been made, then that will forestall a renewed focus on small business. I frankly also think how regulatory agencies like FDIC, OCC, and in some ways, most importantly, the Fed, prioritize access to capital for smaller or small businesses is also going to send a significant signal. So I look forward to staying engaged with you and to continuing to hear from you. I've got staff that are relentless in their interest in small business. And my hope, based on a conversation I had last night with the head of the Treasury transition team for the Biden administration, is that you'll see a significant and sustained engagement with small business by the incoming administration.
That's great news for small businesses. Thank you. Next question. What changes are being made as far as safety from the COVID-19?
Could you define that a little bit more? What changes are being made in terms of safety from the COVID-19? I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of reading the question. So I will give you my interpretation of this. So what changes do we anticipate the Biden administration making in terms of in terms of keeping us safe and keeping small businesses open?
Okay. So the one significant and immediate change I expect, I don't remember having a specific conversation about this, but one area of real frustration has been the refusal of the current administration to deploy OSHA and to say to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, issue a standard for what is expected in terms of workplace safety and cleanliness, and so that employees and customers can have a sense of what they should expect, and so that employers can have a sense of what level of engagement around cleanliness should give them a safe harbor in terms of liability. That absence of a federally promulgated standard has led to a sort of a haphazard patchwork quilt, state by state. Many states have issued no standards at all. Some have simply referred to the CDC. Others have used their state regulatory approach. So I would expect you'll see a federal OSHA standard fairly quickly. And I would expect we'll begin actual negotiations, which have never gotten off the ground in the last 6 months, around liability protection. And then proactively to your point about safety, we're now seeing shortages of personal protective equipment again, and we're seeing emergency rooms and hospitals being overwhelmed. If we've got unchecked spread nationwide, we are going to careen back towards shutdowns in states across the country. President-elect Biden is already trying to get those governors that have resisted mandating masks or putting some restrictions on operating hours and operating practices to agree to do so. We are seeing the virus surging out of control most in those states that have been least safe in terms of their public health standards.
Thank you. Next question. We need legislation to be able to bring back association-sponsored healthcare programs. The current programs offered in Delaware are not affordable unless you earn below the poverty level. As a small business owner in Delaware, this has become a huge business expense and prohibits me from hiring new and older employees.
Look, we don't know, first, what the Supreme Court will do with the existing Affordable Care Act and its structure. And moving healthcare reform legislation is going to be one of the biggest lifts facing us in the next Congress and the next administration. So I don't know whether we will see legislation that would strengthen or fully restore the ability of associations to offer healthcare or health insurance programs. Some of that was impacted by the Affordable Care Act's sort of minimal standards. And some of the changes in that were administrative and may well be reversed by a new administration. And some of them were as a result of a refusal to support or finance that kind of access in terms of association programs from state to state.
Okay. When do you believe a new round of small business grants would be approved, and what about unemployment?
I cannot predict when or if in the lame duck President Trump will say, here's what I will sign. We haven't heard from him at all. I mean, other than tweets about not having lost the election. He has not spoken to what sort of a package he would sign out of Congress. And we have not heard from Majority Leader McConnell, other than an encouraging sign that McConnell now thinks we should have some sort of a package. So I don't come to this today being able to predict magically the behavior of our outgoing president.
Thank you. Okay, this question is from Dave Kenny. Senator Coons, thank you for your service. I have two questions. I would like to hear your thoughts in this Delaware Small Business Forum. In the government's lead to fight the COVID-19 virus, the government has led a shutdown to contain the spread of the deadly virus. Looking forward, what current or proposed legislation or actions have you personally sponsored or co-sponsored to help reduce unemployment or to create jobs that resulted from the shutdown? And do you want me to read the second one, or do you want to answer that one first?
Well, I've already talked about the CARES Act and the ways in which that has provided literally billions of dollars of support across several different programs. One of the things I didn't talk about in more detail is a piece of the CARES Act that was actually specifically my initiative, which was a debt relief program that provided both principal and interest on all the 504 and 7A loans in the state of Delaware, frankly, the entire country, that benefited 320,000 credit-constrained Main Street businesses automatically without any application required. And, you know, frankly, there's $9 billion left that was appropriated for that program. There's $130 billion left that was appropriated roughly for the PPP program. I did speak earlier to the ways in which I am just deeply frustrated at our failure to authorize an extension of those two programs. There's a half dozen others we could speak to. I'm happy to ask my folks to send you what's been up on my website for months about here's the different initiatives and programs that I've either co-authored or that have actually become law.
Okay, great.
What
Is
was
there
the
a,
second half of the question?
I think you've covered a lot of it. I'll go ahead and read it. Most small businesses will not be able to withstand a second government-led shutdown without assistance. What actions or legislations have you sponsored or co-sponsored to help prevent or anticipate and to help small businesses?
So I was the initial author and then a co-sponsor of the so-called P4 or Prioritized Paycheck Protection Program, which is exactly designed to provide a second round of PPP loans that become grants for those who faced a revenue loss that was significant. And it's exactly designed to be targeted at those sectors that are struggling to get through this period. The only reason we'll have a shutdown if we do is because there are other states that have been bluntly irresponsible in not having shut down, not having mandated masks, not having observed the ways in which I don't know what he's holding up. Okay. Sorry, someone in my office is trying to signal something to me. So look, whether or not there is a shutdown in our state is a decision by the governor in response to public health. When you say it's a government-led shutdown, I don't know who else would shut down a state for public health reasons other than government. But let's recognize that it is an attempt to reduce the number of Americans who die. We've had more than 240,000 Americans who die. The latest projections are that could exceed 400,000 by spring. We now have the worst pandemic response on earth. No other advanced country has failed so miserably at leading in terms of a coordinated federal response to the pandemic. I was just on a call 2 days ago with the foreign minister of South Korea. South Korea and the United States had our first reported case on the same day. Just go look up the numbers in terms of how much better a job the South Korean government did. Because our response was disjointed, there was no coordinated federal response. We had states that refused to ever take it seriously and did not ever mandate closure or masking. Those states today have raging pandemics. And because we travel, because during the holidays and we never fully shut down travel within the United States, the pandemic has just continued to spread throughout our country, and we are now in the worst place we've been since the beginning of this pandemic globally. So I have advocated for more lending, more grants, more support for public health, more PPE. I've enthusiastically advanced the bill that invested in vaccine development and that funded the procurement of vaccines through Moderna and AstraZeneca and Pfizer. And we now have at least 3 very promising vaccines that should be available by the second quarter next year. But, honestly, in the absence of federal leadership, it has been maddening to see how this pandemic has gotten out of control in the United States.
Thank you. Next question. Is there a plan in the works to increase the corporate tax rate? And if so, what is the threshold for an increase that business owners should be cognizant of?
There is a detailed economic plan that the Biden-Harris campaign put out that would raise a significant amount of capital. It would raise the corporate rate to 28%, not back to 35%. It does not include a wealth tax as was proposed by some of Joe's competitors in the presidential primaries. And it does have a 21% foreign subsidiary tax proposal that is aligned with some of our competitors in the OECD. I have no idea what the actual proposal will look like next year. That's what the campaign proposal was. If, as I think is likely, the Senate remains Republican controlled, that will significantly constrain what sort of a tax package and what sort of a spending package gets advanced next year. There is no package that I'm aware of that's been revised, frankly, because we're still in transition. The outcome of the election was just announced last Saturday. I think The last two states to be called were just called today. So you can look to the Biden-Harris economic plan from the campaign for some insights, but the realities of politics will dictate what is actually introduced early next year, and then what, if anything, ultimately gets enacted.
Okay, that, as I say to people, my crystal
like
ball's
comments.
really cloudy. Yeah. One of the questions it has to do with how the Senate will be working maybe for the remainder of the year and certainly into the Biden administration. Do you see it becoming more bipartisan?
Well, I'll tell you that's certainly how I've approached things. I called through my Republican colleagues who were reelected and have had a series of positive conversations. Some of them called to congratulate me, and it produced some really interesting and in many cases constructive conversations. Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham, John Cornyn. These are just three of the Republicans probably known to many of you who I've had lengthy conversations with in this past week. One of the other things I did that's, small but symbolic was, while in session this week, I reached out to Republicans who were newly elected. So, for example, Bill Hagerty, who's the new senator from Tennessee, is someone who I met when he was ambassador to Tokyo. He is a very conservative Republican, but fortunately, Bob Corker, his colleague, and Lamar Alexander, his predecessor, both encouraged him to come meet with me, and I reached out to him to congratulate him on his election. And Bill and I sat down and spent 45 minutes together talking about how we might work together. And I gave him some advice about how to navigate the challenges of transitioning into being a U.S. Senator. He's someone who's never served in elected office anywhere. And so the sort of business of being a senator is a little puzzling. I found my own transition from county executive to senator somewhat challenging in terms of, what to focus on and how to prioritize. Of course, I've had conversations with Democrats who were reelected as well. One of the things that's frustrating to me is the ways in which we are having trouble beginning a transition. A few Republicans have recognized that Joe Biden has been elected the next president and have reached out to me and asked me to congratulate him. But the overwhelming majority of Republicans have not yet recognized the outcome of the election.
Well, hopefully that'll be changing in the next couple of days. And we can begin moving and working towards a more bipartisan government and getting some stuff done. Is it possible, would it be possible in future legislation to apply truth in advertising laws to political campaigns?
That's a great question. My expectation, the Supreme Court has changed somewhat, but my expectation is that First Amendment analysis would apply, so-called strict scrutiny analysis would apply, and you'd have real difficulty doing that. Commercial speech is not as protected under our Constitution as political speech, and campaign ads are almost the epitome of political speech, and the sort of thing that in a democracy, there would be folks vigorously opposed to the idea of the government regulating or restraining free speech. We're going to have a hearing next week where Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and I'm forgetting his name, I think it's Jack Dorsey of Twitter, are going to appear in front of the Judiciary Committee. And I know they're going to get aggressive and vigorous questioning, but the two parties are likely to ask different things. Conservatives are upset at what they view as Twitter and Facebook censoring those who wanted to send out messages supporting, for example, some of President Trump's theories and views that were restrained. Others of us may ask questions about hate speech and incitement to violence and the ways in which Facebook and Twitter were slow to recognize and try and tamp down efforts to encourage vigilantism. On both sides, we're going to be asking questions about social media and how social media should be held accountable when they are not as fully subject to regulations in terms of how they manage political ads as television and radio and print. We don't have a modernized regulatory framework. If you see an ad on Facebook, you don't see at the end of it, "I'm Chris Coons and I approve this message," because there isn't a comparable regulatory framework. But for there to be truth in advertising standards, frankly, most political ads would fail those standards. And it's the challenge is that our Constitution and our free speech standards expect the electorate to be informed and to reject things that are demonstrably false. And we have just come through a period where falsehood in public speech by elected officials is a daily occurrence.
New question that just came in. Given the lack of lab space, will Delaware get more tax-free enterprise zones to take advantage of the boom in life sciences?
I don't know whether opportunity zones will be renewed, extended, reimagined. I was a co-sponsor with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina of the initial bill that created opportunity zones. It then got rolled into the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was a Republican-only bill that did not get any Democratic votes. But Senator Scott and I have talked a number of times about my admiration for his work on opportunity zones and my hope that it can be renewed, extended, and focused in ways that will be more beneficial. They've been hard to take full advantage of because of some of the rules that Treasury wrote in terms of exactly how they're implemented. And a new Treasury Secretary and a new administration, I hope, will look at opportunity zones, not get rid of them, but apply some more robust metrics that ensure that they're actually benefiting the communities where they are. As many, I think, on this call know, the STAR campus is in an opportunity zone, and that has helped incentivize some investment there. There are ways that we could accelerate investment around things like lab space. And so I certainly welcome your advice and input going forward in terms of how we make that happen.
Okay, great. Next question. Senator Coons, thank you for everything you were doing for Delaware, this country, and small businesses, as well as congratulations in the recent election. Will you discuss potential federal increases in minimum wages? What are your feelings on this, as well as where training wages fit within this? In the hospitality industry especially, where do entry wages for high school students or employees in the workplace fall, as well as tiered pay for the entry-level jobs where incentives of increased pay come with increased skills within a business? Okay, that was a lot. Do you want me to repeat it or maybe break it up?
I think I know where the questioner is going, so let me try. Federal minimum wage is, how do I describe it? Legislating around minimum wage is a minefield because people have sort of two very different pictures in their mind. Legislators, senators have very different approaches and attitudes towards when you say minimum wage, what are you talking about? For one whole group, their archetype is someone who's working at a restaurant in high school while they're still living with their parents, as a trainee, as an entry-level job. Others say, yeah, but there are millions and millions of single parents trying to raise children who are working 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs. And in this latter mindset, the minimum wage should be a livable wage. And if you are doing minimum wage work, it should be a wage on which you can sustain yourself and support a family. Demonstrably, it is not. And part of the push behind a $15 an hour minimum wage is to make minimum wage something on which you could support yourself independently and a family. At the same time, those who run hospitality businesses in particular look at that and say, well, but hang on a minute, how am I supposed to train people And can't we have a tiered minimum wage or a regional minimum wage so that we recognize that what might make sense in Manhattan or in Seattle as a minimum wage doesn't make sense in Smyrna or in Georgetown, Delaware. This is a politically very difficult field because there are as many who want to have a lower minimum wage and a training wage and a regional wage as there are who insist that they will only accept a big jump in the federal minimum wage. The result of that over decades has been that the minimum wage kind of goes for years at a certain level and then jumps up, and then goes for years and then jumps up. We're at a point now where most businesses pay above the federal minimum wage to people who have any sort of skill or length of service at all. And the tip wage hasn't been raised in years. My general view is that we would be better with an escalator that is modest and annual than having the minimum wage stay at one rate for 10 or 15 years and then jump by 30% or by 100%, or some current proposals 200%. I have tried to move a regional minimum wage bill that would recognize the differences between MSAs and found it faced withering opposition. And I think it was Sasha who asked this question. I think that's in the chat room.
Right.
I don't have a clear or good answer about what I think is going to happen. This is an issue that has not seen legislative movement in years, and where more than not, it actually ends up getting worked out at the municipal and state level. And for us, that may be the best thing for right now. I don't foresee a big change in the federal minimum wage in the middle of a recovery, but it will certainly be on the agenda of many bills that will be discussed and debated next year.
One more question. You've come out in favor of Representative Morella's Innovation Center's Acceleration Act. Do you envision Delaware competing to be one of the 9 centers to be funded?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Now, I mean, I'll just answer that slightly differently. I believe, if I understand correctly, the bill that's being referenced, it's one that I'm co-sponsoring and helping try and get moving in the Senate. It is exactly because I think Delaware might be competitive for these new sort of second-tier centers that I am interested in it, but I cannot guarantee. The whole point of a competition is it's a competition. But the concentration of venture capital, the concentration of very high-end work in the life sciences or in biopharma or in other fields, you know, there's really just a few places in the country: Research Triangle, Route 128 corridor in North Carolina and in Boston, Silicon Valley, a few others that have an enormous concentration of research, of startups, of venture capital. If I recall correctly, the bill that you're talking about, it invests federal research dollars and access to credit and training and grant opportunities. It spreads them out to a constellation of second-tier cities so that there is a greater opportunity across the country. Depending on what criteria were ultimately decided upon, you might see a significant increase in federal investment in cities more like the size of Baltimore or Philadelphia than Wilmington, but that would directly benefit us. We would be part of the greater footprint. If you look at a sort of a heat map or a concentration map of federal investment into venture capital activity, it's stunning how concentrated that is in just a few places around the country. And a lot of what I've done through programs like SBIR, through programs through the SBDC, is to try and push that out to third-tier cities and smaller states like ours, so that we've got an opportunity to compete. One of the last public events I did was an announcement of a grant at Delaware State University by NASA for federally funded research. We've done a lot of work in my office to partner with the University of Delaware and Delaware State University, with NIH, with NSF, with NASA, with other federal agencies and to try and make sure that we get our share of federal research and of Department of Commerce and SBA investment. We have to make sure that we keep working to make that more accessible, more transparent, and more responsive to the needs of people in communities like ours that maybe don't have huge federal facilities as a few other places in the country do.
That sounds really exciting. I hope we either get one here or one really close so we can benefit from that. I don't have any more questions that I'm going to give you. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
On Friday afternoon at 4:30, I will be brief and say thank you for hosting. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I've got a great team, and they work very hard and are very responsive. But I'd encourage you to keep contacting us and keep giving us the opportunity to work through questions and challenges and issues. These next 2 months of transition are going to be challenging, but they're also an opportunity for us to hear from you and to work for you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to represent you in Washington and to fight for you here in Delaware as well.
Thank you, Chris. And I didn't get to say earlier, congratulations on your re-election. I know I'm really thrilled to have you there and representing the interests of small businesses. And we really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us about what you see coming up. And I really also want to thank your team. They were great in helping us get you scheduled and get this together. You do have a really great team. I'd also like to thank our sponsors and Delaware Business Times. And I think Mike from is going to make our final closing remarks. So, Senator, I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too, Margo.
Yes, just to thank you again, Senator Coons and Margo, and everyone else for participating in today's presentation. And special thanks to our sponsors, Artisans Bank, BNY Mellon, and Harvey Hanna and Associates. On behalf of everyone at Delaware Business Times and the Small Business Development Center, have a terrific afternoon and a great weekend. Thank you again.